Welcome to the Clean Power Hour Live. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Today on the Clean Power Hour, grazing sheep under solar is good for sheep, at least in Australia. New York's Build Ready is an example of a public-private partnership that's good for a cleaner grid. And wind and solar dominate new energy. We energy professionals know this, but it's becoming a regular thing, and it's great. Solar pavers are coming to a patio near you. It's summer, the sun is shining, and I hope you're wearing your flip-flops. John Weaver, the commercial solar guy, and my co-host. Welcome to the show.
Timothy, how are you doing? Tim, I'm not wearing flip-flops, unfortunately, because I walk the streets of a city. But it did rain, and now it's overcast, so I guess that means it's springtime. So it's not summer yet. Working on it, though.
Yeah, I guess
So,
technically it is still spring for a nary 3 weeks. But yeah, we're enjoying some beautiful sunny and 75 weather. I have started sailing. I've joined the Clinton Lake Sailing Club. Clinton Lake was created in the late 70s, early 80s because they built a big nuclear power plant and dammed a small river, which is now a really big lake, and it's wonderful sailing. So I'm grateful for that nuclear power plant. And someday it'll make a
yeah,
nice floating solar array too.
I, what a great idea. But we won't be able to sail on it as much, though.
Well, we
So there's
only need a
that.
small part of the lake for the. It's like it's a very big lake. It's like 50,000 acres. Um, and so
A lot of acres.
there's room for both, I think.
Yeah.
And I've actually done some layouts. I have a dream of developing an energy park around this Clinton Power Station, doing some gravity batteries and wind and solar and floating solar. But yeah, there's room for all of us.
All right. All right.
But
Floating solar is nice.
nice
All right.
consistent wind, which is something that sailors look for. So I'm pretty stoked.
What about some? Is there wind in this region? Turbines, wind turbines.
Nearby, yes.
Okay.
Central Illinois is blessed with lots of wind because it is the prairie and there's not a lot of obstructions to slow the wind down. And yes, we have a fair amount of wind in Central Illinois, uh, several gigawatts anyway. And yeah, I always thought I'd work in the wind industry before I worked in solar because that's what when we got our RPS in 2008, that's what happened first was large scale wind. And but here I am developing community solar and CNI solar, and that's a good life too. So no
Cool.
regrets.
Cool.
So Australia,
Cool story.
we often do
Could.
equate Australia with sheep. They have a lot of sheep in Australia, but and
Yep.
a lot of solar. So what's the story? I'll put this on screen.
So first, of course, you have to recognize it's coming from farmers who are selling their sheep. So I do wonder how accurate this is, but there's a few details that make it seem like a longer term story. So for 4 years, a few farmers down in Australia have co-located their sheep grazing with solar and done some leasing. And we I found this via an article on ABC dot something ABC.au, and the farmers have said that over the last 4 years, their sheep that graze underneath the solar panels look better, look healthier, look firmer than other sheep due to aridness in the region. In
Hmm.
fact, a drought was the terminology that was used.
Yeah.
And the reason I chose this image to be included amongst them is if you literally look underneath the solar panels, it's greener than it is out in the open field.
Yep.
And the farmers, one of the farmers said specifically, the condensation that's dripping off the panels in the morning on that front edge leads to more grass growing underneath the solar panels. And I thought that was kind of neat. Just neat in general. But then the biggest thing that it was neat to me is that a few years ago, and it's at the bottom of this article, I covered a research paper from University of Oregon, and the doctor out there had uh, just luckily noticed, serendipitously noticed, a difference in the grasses growing underneath solar panels on their campus. And so she decided to do some research. And in the end, they suggested, and I think it's like 90% more grasses, specific grasses, noting they were sheep grasses in that particular article. It may have even said cow grasses as well. But for this, I remember the sheep article, or the sheep portion of it. And so that research, and here's a chart of it right here. That research is cool because, hey, solar panels can do more than just do solar panels. They can actually better the environment. They can add water to the ground. And that sentence right above the image is really important. So what actually occurs is that the solar panels, I guess, hide the wind and hide the sunlight, allowing the soil to hold up to 328% more water, or maybe water efficiency. Maybe not 328% more water, but having greater efficiency. They have very specific science terminology sometimes, so I don't want to BS. But 328, that's a pretty number. And now this news, quote unquote, this anecdotal evidence seems to suggest that there's something to this. And if that kind of news gets hot to trot, it's now, we're making your land better by having better grasses, better water retention. We're doing things positive for the land by having our solar panels there. And that's big. I think it's really big, personally.
Yeah, I can see in more arid parts of the world, like Australia or the Western United States, for that matter, right, where this is going to be very good for plants growing under solar panels, which otherwise would be parched and not very productive for things that want to eat those plants. So yeah, it makes good sense. And it's nice to see the American Solar Grazing Association doing their thing and pairing up farmers, ranchers with solar developers. If you don't know about ASGA, check it out, American Solar Grazing Association. And we had their former executive director on the show, Lexi Hain. She's now moved on and works for one of the larger developers. I can't remember the developer she works with, but anyway, cool. Great organization. Based in New York State, I think.
Think so.
Yep.
I think it's more than just arid regions. Like this particular research pointed out water retention. But I think as we start to refine our farming techniques when using this technology, we might find that we can grow different and better things in different regions because we now have different techniques of managing our land. And I don't know, maybe we'll see crops that would only fit in certain regions be able to shift to new regions because we're protecting them a little better. Even in addition to the arid focused region, there might be regions like, say, Florida, where it's not arid, but the sun's strong. And so you want to protect things a little bit.
Yep. And then there's the animal welfare, too. I'm sure the animals appreciate the shade because the sun is hot. And, they're out there taking it on their back most of the time. So you could see in that photo how they are clustered under the solar panels, and it's no accident. They're digging the shade, so it's a win-win. Happier and healthier sheep.
And I've seen plenty of pictures where you see the sheep just move regularly underneath the panels, like in a line, and they avoid the open area as best they can. So it's true.
Yep. Now, if I just jump to the next tab, does that go on screen? Are we at the NYSERDA story?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Well, let's just do that. It's just easier for me to go tab to tab. So you got another story, Mr. Weaver, about New York developing its Build Ready program. Tell us about that.
So it's cool because of the state de-risking development. And what I like about it is that it gives, I mean, it's the de-risking thing. So at the highest level, the state has a website, and it says submit solar pieces of land that you think would be good for solar and why. And it's not just, hey, here's a square on a farmland. They're looking for underutilized land, landfills, land that isn't gonna get used for whatever reason. And this, they said right now they have 5,000 submissions, and they're working on about 30 projects that range from 5 to 20 megs. The state will work, and this is the first project right here, the BR Benson Mines, and this one's 20 megs AC. There's some nice documents, some nice drawings. If you get into their presentation, the breakdown of the files.
Yeah, so
and it's
here's the
like,
NYSERDA landing page on the BR Benson Mines. And it was a privately owned former iron ore mine, closed in the 1970s. So I would call this a brownfield, and brownfields to brightfields. It's great repurposing of land that probably can't be used for a lot of other things.
And let's see if we scroll down a tiny bit further. Let's see what else I got. Oh, they don't have all the docs there. So in the presentation, they link to in-depth engineering documents. And when we go back to the article, you can see it. They don't show them here, but it's pretty cool. I downloaded like a 70 megawatt zoning package, and it was pretty nice. They also have a interconnection report that was in there. And it was estimated around 1.9 million. Oh, there's the document. So this page, you can see the different appendices. And the one that I thought was the best was the project design set and then the interconnection feasibility report. So 1.9 million bucks interconnection on a 20 meg, that ain't bad. And so the most interesting thing about this, so if the state, now scroll down a tiny bit more so you can see this nice pretty graphic. So if the state does all the hard work, gets all the zoning, all the permits, all the interconnection in place, we as solar people, what are we looking at? We're looking at somebody to build it and then somebody to own it, instead of somebody to develop it. And development, there's a lot of cash in. Construction, there's a lot of cash in too, but lower margins. And then owning it is whatever it is. And so I wonder how this will change the marketplace, how developers might get involved in projects like this, how construction firms might choose to get involved. And then instead of, in the construction firm doesn't need to have a developer, they just need to have a project valuation expert. And then once the construction firm starts to build it and they own the rights to it, then they move forward with asset owners. And so this this cuts out the developer to a lot of degrees and makes this a construction and asset ownership process, which is different than what solar is. And, let's say they get 1,000 sites and each one average is 10 megs. That's 10 gigs. They could do a lot of capacity here. Especially if they're focusing on sites that are challenging and they can get through zoning and use state resources. And I'm interested in it. I'm wondering what they're going to auction, how they are going to auction and sell things off, and what that money is going to go toward. Because development cash is real cash, and these companies that are going to buy these projects, they're going to buy them at PTO pricing, permission to operate pricing, or construction guys. And then there's going to be some competition. This is New York. There's going to be some smart people with some good spreadsheets looking at these projects saying, all right, this is how much money it's going to give off for 20, 25, 30 years. And this is what we're going to bid. And it's going to be a competitive number, and it's going to be millions of dollars. This project might get 10, 15 cents a watt. And let's just say it's AC, just for the heck of it. Let's do 10 cents in AC. Is that $2 million bucks? $2 million development fee for this project?
Mm-hmm.
Seems about right.
Mm-hmm.
Where's that $2 million bucks go? $2 million bucks development fee. that's going to go to the state when they auction it. That's a lot of state cash resources to development. I'm really interested in this program.
So let me see if I understand this correctly. A a developer or a community member or a landowner identifies a site, throws the site over the fence to NYSERDA. NYSERDA does some initial due diligence on the site and then says yay or nay. And then is NYSERDA then continuing to do the initial development at legwork?
In the presentation, they show the engineering firms they've partnered with. They
Okay.
show, the civil, the electrical, other
Yeah.
other groups.
Yeah.
Yeah. So NYSERDA just brings it through all of the development processes.
And so they're using tax dollars to develop, a public good, green energy, clean green energy, and potentially augmenting the pipeline of projects that are already being developed on, say, greenfields. Brownfield solar is a niche, and there are certainly developers that specialize in it. Amoresco is one of those, for example. They do a lot of brownfield development, but it is considered higher risk and it is slightly more expensive. The risks are, you know, nuanced and many. Maybe there's dangerous materials buried in the ground or something like that. So I like it that this public institution is taking on some of that risk and going where others may not, quote unquote, dare to tread. But do I have it right that in a way it's augmenting the pipeline of work? Will developers perceive this as competition?
They should.
It's both and. It's competition, but it's also creating some pipeline of projects that they can acquire.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And some, different classes of developers will see it as competition. Some won't. Like a developer like me who does early stage development and then hands off the final stage development, I'm being competed with. A developer who usually buys at NTP only and then handles all the construction, procurement, finance. And one aspect that's with this contract, there is a 20-year renewable energy certificate contract, 2025, but no offtake necessarily. So then the developer has to find an off-taker. So different classes of developers will find competition. Other classes of developers will find a new vertical of products to augment. So, and I really like the idea. Like, I think the concept of de-risking certain volumes of projects, if zoning is such a big challenge, then here it is. If we can get through zoning and interconnection via state connections and state processes, then
Yeah.
things are a little different. Things evolve real quickly.
And it sounds like this program has some legs. Like this is going to be a multi-year program.
Yeah, so what actually this article is about is that the state has an RFI out, a request for information. And they're asking developers, that's you, Tim, and me, they're asking developers to review the processes they have in the documents. They have a specific document to review and then give feedback, because they very specifically say, when do you developers want to buy these projects? And so they're trying to figure out how to do this best. And I think it's going to be a multi-year program with legs. I mean, they've already been developing it for at least 2 years from what I saw, like sometime in 2020. It started, so we're at, or maybe around 2 years. And they say they have 30 projects that are moving forward out of 5,000. So, I mean, that could be a lot of volume. And it takes years for these projects to move, especially, if something actually is a Superfund site, then a Superfund site that's going to take a couple years. A normal state brownfield, a little different. But yeah.
I mean, I guess one thought I have is that because NYSERDA is a state agency, maybe they'll get more cooperation from other agencies as opposed to private industry. But I guess that's TBD, and time will tell.
Yeah, we got to ask somebody, interview them.
Yeah.
Now, this is a parallel to something actually that's happening on the federal level as well. The federal government is starting to put out, Bureau of Land Management is putting out chunks of land, like tens of thousands of acres in western U.S., saying, hey,
Yes.
solar developers, go after it, like, and specifying land.
The story I saw was that they're reducing their lease rates also, right? So the land is becoming more affordable.
Actually, from numbers I've read, the lease rates were already really low. Like cattle, they spend like $10 an acre. It's like it's
Yeah.
way low. Like solar people can pay 2, 3, 4 times easy what
Yeah.
cattle people pay.
What most people don't realize is that it's a huge amount of real estate that we're using for grazing of especially cattle, but cattle and sheep. It's something like 40% of the land area of the continental U.S. It's a huge chunk of land, and it's mostly out west. But so yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity on federal lands for solar. We just need that HVDC grid, that the HVDC Dyson sphere. Let's get that going, John.
Yep, waiting on it.
Should we talk about Ukraine? You found some very interesting
Boom.
photographs of craters
Boom,
that happen to be surrounded by solar panels.
boom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's sucks. What's going on right now? I wake up and it's just in my stomach occasionally. Yeah, so this solar plant took a missile, and it landed in the middle of one row. It affected at least one row. From what I read, the plant was back up next day, same day, something like that. A little bit of throw a fuse here or there, unplug a few panels, reorient the ones that are close enough on the string, and it was back running. But those 4 images are pretty clear. Nice big hole right in the middle of it, and I think it was like a 6-foot deep hole. So, but
Yeah.
just a missile.
Yep. Pretty intense.
Now, you gonna share those images?
You can't see them?
No, sir. Got to keep us in the same window.
How about now? That
There's
working?
a guy walking in a big hole.
Yeah.
So that gives you some perspective.
So there's that crater you were referring to. Sorry, I have not mastered the technology, nor will I ever, because it seems to change. But we're rolling with those punches. Yeah, it's this is sad.
Notice-
I feel very sad, John. I'm bummed about the war in Ukraine, but it is interesting also, I have to say, to see what a solar farm looks like after a missile hits it.
Notice, I'm guessing, all the damaged panels in the background, all the discolored ones. I'm guessing that's from like shrapnel or things when the missile
Yeah.
exploded. Maybe panels flying or something. Because if you notice where the big hole is, there's some panels that aren't there anymore. They're somewhere else.
Yeah, indeed. But it is interesting that they were able to keep the plant running.
Yeah. Yep. Thought that was cool.
Yeah,
And it's like the solar panel farms, it started really high with a big number, are very distributed, like inherently. They're distributed. So first you got, the solar farm itself. It's distributed because solar farms tend to be smaller than big gas or coal facilities. Then when you get to the solar plant, you do usually have one transformer. Maybe you have a couple. So that's a weakness, individual point. But once you're inside the facility, then you have a whole bunch of, you got some switch gear, but then you have a whole bunch of inverters. And any one of those could fail, and everything else goes fine. Then if you go into the inverter, you got a bunch of strings coming into a combiner box, or a bunch of strings coming to the inverter, and each one of those could fail. Then you get onto your strings, you got panels. Each one of those could fail. Then you get into your panels, you got quadrants or halves or thirds or however your panel's wired. Then you got the diodes. Well, it's the diodes usually doing that split. So you have these like multiple layers down. And so you could take a shotgun blast, boom, take out a third of a solar panel. And if it's out of 1 million panels, you'll lose 1/3 of 1/1,000,000% because the rest of the system will just keep on cruising. So that's cool. So you can blow up literally a chunk of your solar farm, and the rest of it will keep chugging along as best it can.
Trying to figure out what story we're going to go to here.
I think we should talk about the 100-year battery.
Oh, the 100-year battery.
Here, we'll put it up here. We're going to move it after the Ukrainian. So, bam, 100-year battery. So it's up here. There you go. I think their name is Dahl, Roger Dahl or Robert Dahl, but it's a research group that's owned / funded / partially owned by Tesla, and they're based up in Canada. They're the skunk works of sorts for Tesla battery tech, and they've put out a few documents that have been really cool. I don't know how much of their work has specifically filtered into Tesla technology, because that's beyond me, but I do remember 3 specific reports coming out of theirs, and the first one, they said, listen, the right battery could last 1 million miles. And I was like, holy crap, 1 million mile battery. And we've seen Tesla batteries at 400,000 or 500,000 miles with 90% of their capacity left. So it was making me think, oh yeah, a million mile battery, that's real. And later they had a 2 million mile battery, and I was like, all right, well, now cars, I've every once in a while you see this cool little ad, and you see like a Toyota pickup that lasts 1 million miles, and you're like, yeah, it's a Toyota pickup. That's what they do. They last 1 million miles. And now we're gonna have 2 million mile pickups, all of them, and the batteries are gonna be at 80%, and it's gonna be like, that's a little different. That's something interesting.
Yeah, I think the million mile car is going to become a real thing. Most people are pretty happy if their car goes 150 or 200,000 miles today, but the EV has so many fewer moving parts that it's going to break down less and last longer. And not having a big, hot internal combustion engine that is definitely going to fall apart. That's just going to be a thing. So, but is there some secret sauce revealed here? It says LFP, right? So it's lithium iron phosphate.
Nickel, heavy nickel battery. So the key with this one is keeping the temperature. Now, I think it's 25 degrees. Let's go back to that article. And so they said if they can keep the temperature at 25 degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius, I'll tell you right now, that is the key to the long life of what they see. And see, energy density at 40, 55, and I think it's going to be C. So ultra high. So who's balanced true? Better or less capacity? Lifetime yielding a century. So ultra high precision coulometry and electrochemistry impedance spectroscopy, are used to complement cycling results and investigate the reason for improved performance of the NMC cells, particularly those balanced and charged at 3.8 volts and temperatures at 25 C. are projected to yield lifetimes approaching a century. So just at a certain set of variables, 3.8 volts, 25 degrees Celsius, X, Y, and Z as their variables, 100-year battery. 100-year battery means that your stationary battery in your house will last as long as your house. Because a car is probably much harder to keep at 25. But your house battery, you probably can do it. And 25 is pretty warm. I mean, what is 25 to
25 degrees C.
Yeah, 77. Okay, it's not warm. It's nice
Oh,
afternoon.
yeah.
So it's, in a cold place, you'll have this heater in your house. In a hot place, you'll have a cooler in your house. You know. So, but 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So if they can keep the battery at 77 degrees Fahrenheit, then that's pretty big. And 100 years. And you know what? The people who do great batteries, they're going to figure out how to keep their batteries at 25 degrees. And if they can have 100-year financial return on investment with no degradation, that's huge. That changes a whole bunch of rules. There's, people talk about long duration storage. I I don't know. I don't know why we need long duration storage if we have lithium battery types that last indefinitely. I mean, if there's no degradation, the cost becomes very tiny when you roll it out for 50 years, for 100 years.
Yeah. I think it's a both and. I think we'll have lithium. I think we'll have zinc. There's a lot of zinc battery technology in the news. I'm looking forward to having NZinc on the show here coming up. And our one of our most popular videos is our interview we did with Energy Dome, the CO2 storage company. People are clearly interested in alternative storage technologies.
People
So,
love energy storage, without a doubt.
yeah,
They're hoping for breakthroughs. They believe that breakthroughs are necessary. One of the most popular stories on PV Magazine in the last year or two is going to turn out to be an absolute fraud. It's the people building batteries by bricks and cranes. It's like, come on. I mean, now I'm seeing people do the math, and it's like, it's really
the gravity
rough.
battery is not going to fly.
I don't know anything because I don't know anything. I mean, everybody knows that I don't know anything, but from the people who seem to know some stuff, and I do my
Well,
very
it's off
best to
the shelf.
comprehend.
I mean, I don't know how it pencils, but I like the fact that it's off the shelf. It does have a lot of moving parts, and so that's
That's what it
potential.
comes down to. Well, it
Yeah.
also comes down to literally the math of how much energy, kinetic energy, and the other energy, kinetic and something, that's in the block when you lift it. Like this dude, he ran some numbers I saw, and at the end of it, it's like he moved like 1,000 bricks or whatever, and it had 32.4 kilowatt hours. I'm like, that's like 3 Teslas. And he's like, yeah. He's like, this is a building. It's like, no, that's not going to work. That's a lot of material. And then a key thing that somebody brought up with me, they said, John, look at the height of that crane that their suggestion. Okay. You really think that crane can run 24/7 in rain, wind, sun? It's really hard to keep cranes stable during weird weather. And now you're going to link up a bunch of bricks to it. That thing's going to fall over. I was like, interesting. So I didn't like it at first. I still don't like it. Oh, and concrete people have been attacking the idea. They say, really? You have a brick that will last 35 years outside getting picked up and dropped X number of times a day? Sell it to us. We will pay you for that material alone. And you can do whatever you want with this battery thing.
Yeah.
Like, oh. So I just, meh.
I like Elon's quote recently was he was asked about fusion energy. Is it going to be a real thing? He said, "Oh yeah, technically solvable. Will it be cost effective? Probably not." And that's kind of where I am on that. I would love to have fusion energy here on Earth, but I don't think it's going to be cost effective. But we'll see.
Not in the next 100 years, maybe. Maybe in like 200 years, when we move on to the next level species and there's like 40 billion of us and the cost doesn't matter as much, then we'll be like, yeah, let's do some fusion.
I just say build the HVDC grid, and then you just need wind and solar. You don't even need a battery.
We're going to build giant floating and solid wind farms in Alaska and Antarctica, and we're going to float space solar at the poles, north and south of the Earth, and just beam it straight to the poles.
I like those. I ran across a wind company some years ago. This is like 15 years ago. that was building a platform that you flew up to altitude, like where airplanes fly at 30,000 feet, and where the wind blows all the time at 100 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just sits there and it's tethered, and it brings the power down. Right? Conceptually, these things work. The reality is it's probably too much trouble and expense to make it work on the grid. The grid is very finicky that way. Money talks, and that's why this next story is a thing, right? Only solar and wind projects were added to the U.S. grid in March of 2022. Our friend Kelly Pickrell at Solar Power World did this story. And, for years now, I don't know how many years, but for years now, wind and solar have been the fastest growing source of new power on the grid. Still, parts of the world are building new coal and other, like nuclear and gas plants. But in March, in the U.S., no new other sources of power were built. So that's pretty cool.
Nothing in the U.S. is coal. There's no coal planned for the U.S. And this report, this is the Ferc report. So the Ferc report also looks forward 3 years. And going forward 3 years, it says high probability, this is coming from memory, like 70-ish, 60 to 80 gigs of wind and solar of being constructed, and very little being retired. Then for fossils, they have about 25 gigs of new gas coming, but 45 gigs being retired. So
Yeah.
that I thought's neat. We're still building new gas to replace the coal because we need flexible gas instead of the old clunky coal. But it's evolving. It's negative that these 25 gigs of facilities are expected to run for 20 years from a financial standpoint, but this money's going to end up hurting consumers in those regions. But still, at the end of 3 years, they expect there to be 20 gigawatts lesser fossil capacity in the U.S. and 60 gigs more wind and solar. So that's 80 gigawatts between those three chunks, and a difference, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, this is the tipping point embodied, and this is the energy transition embodied. In March, all new sources of energy were wind and solar, and this is a trend that's going to continue. And it's really good timing because we truly need this. We need to actually double the rate at which we're growing wind and solar in order to truly step back from climate chaos. But I'll take it that we're at least now slowing down significantly on the fossil technology. Our CO2 emissions are still going up globally, so we've got to pump the brakes, humans. Time to pump the brakes. And I don't want to talk at length about this because I'm not really prepared to, but I'm going to put this report on screen. This is a report called The Turning Point by Deloitte & Touche, and I will put a link in the show notes. But according to their study, unchecked climate change could cost the global economy $178 trillion in net present value from 2021 to 2070. And that's not including many other human costs in terms of suffering from disruption of food systems and water systems. The net benefit would be if we were to transform the grid in a radical way, right? If we were truly to net zero the economy globally by mid-century, the net benefit would be 43 trillion. So do you want to spend 178 trillion cleaning up a really messy climate chaos, or do you want to benefit by 43 trillion? It seems like a no-brainer to me, considering that you're also then building in all this resiliency, cleaner air, better health, a much safer future for future generations. Lots of clean jobs. It's just common sense. And so that is, it's just great that these mainstream institutions like Deloitte are now on this page, and it's credible research, and the world of finance is listening, and it's like a tide, John. There's just gobs and gobs of money flowing into wind, solar, and battery storage, and right now there's more money than there are projects. So that's good for developers, right? There's competition for your projects.
I mean, yes, it makes it hard sometimes emotionally when you see all kinds of great stuff going on around you. You're like, wow, these people are doing great, but there's a lot of project demand out there. No questions asked. Yeah,
So
the volumes that are being deployed now are huge, big, important. They need to grow. The comment that you brought up, it's funny that we're talking about the economic benefit and the potential losses of skirting species killing potentially climate change. We are looking at this too much as if it's an economic decision. We're like, you know what, the economy might go bad for a couple of years. It's we're trying to play that game with climate change, and there's a challenge there in the fact that we can't just print more money, and we don't yet have tools to suck out the CO2 quickly. The scale of the problem is so giant versus our economic system, but we're trying to play it like an economic game. We think, the climate is a bank, and if the bank's unhealthy, we can fix it. Either A, we can just go broke for a year or two, or B, we can print some cash. And, what we're saying is, yeah, we just print some carbon capture. It's not happening yet, buddy. And maybe that's a good next article, because I don't know, we're acting weird. Anyway, but carbon capture.
Let's talk about
Yeah.
let's talk about this paver first, just because it's ready
Sure.
to roll. And
I like the paver.
and I'm really grateful for this this colleague of yours, Emiliano Bellini, at PB Magazine. He keeps the solar tech coming. But tell us about the solar paver.
Just new form factor. Scroll down a tiny bit. 4 cells.
Hungary's Platio Solar.
Yeah, look at that. That's it. And they plug together, and they sit down in your driveway or your sidewalk or something.
Your patio or driveway.
They look a little pricey. It probably costs a little more for installation, having to dig out the ground. But racking you won't need. Maybe you got to pour down some gravel. Got a couple of layers to keep the ground stable, and then you just click them together, run some wire, some conduit to your house.
Yeah,
And
nice rendering there of a driveway.
yeah, I think it's a great idea. I know it won't be as efficient because it's not perfectly angled, but who cares? You get more space, and they say cars can drive on it. That's not their goal, but they can, so that's good. So I don't know, just cool product. People like these types of things. Put it in public spaces, parks. There's all kinds of different places you could have this type of product.
Yep.
And I'm certain somebody's going to come up with a product that works in dry parking lots, and maybe it'll work as well. Maybe it won't, because some parking lots are pretty crowded. Some parking lots aren't crowded. If it's a heavily parked parking lot, then okay, it won't work as well. Put a carport there instead of the pavers, but there's something. So I like it. I like this idea. It's just kind of neat. A new form factor.
Yep. I'm with you. I think solar pavers are definitely going to be a thing. It's just bleeding edge right now, and but it's only a matter of time. And in the meantime, we can completely green the grid without it. It's just, it makes sense to use the built environment. We've already covered 6% of in the U.S. with the built environment, with roads and buildings. And so we should use as much of that as possible so we don't have to develop solar farms or other applications of ground mount solar on greenfields. It's obviously it's going to be a both and, but the less we can do on greenfield, the better. So I want to find this story on carbon capture. Oh, here we go. Inside Climate News. Yeah.
So what's going on here is that in Wyoming, the biggest coal state at this point, they're pushing carbon capture so that they can keep their coal people making money, because that's their existence. That's really just it. If they don't, they're going down. And the issue is, though, that the carbon capture facility is going to cost $500 million, which is about triple the price of the coal plant that it's capturing the carbon from, and it's going to use about 1/3 of the coal plant's electricity to capture that carbon, and it's still not going to capture all of it. Does it say a percentage there? I don't think it said a percentage. Then that cost, so we're tripling the coal plant cost. It would increase electricity bills an estimated 16%. Before you consider that they have to now build a new coal plant to make up for the lost 1/3 of energy. And 16%, they said, was $25 a month for the average person. So the average homeowner is going to pay an extra $600 a year for carbon capture on their coal plant. And then they're going to build a new one and have to probably pay $5 a year for that one. So it's probably like $20 a year or $30 a month to deal with this. 30, 35, 40 maybe.
Yeah, so Wyoming gets 60% of their power from coal, and Wyoming produces 40% of the nation's coal. It's a huge coal producer. So it's not surprising that the state is doing something to try to prop up the coal industry. When you try to do carbon capture, technically, right, it's totally doable. It's just highly energetic. And if you're using the coal electricity and thereby needing more of it, that is pretty much a vicious cycle, I would say. And the writing is on the wall that the coal industry is fundamentally flawed. Many coal companies have gone out of business in the last decade. We're shutting down coal plants left and right. This is not a forward-looking policy. Au contraire, Mr. Governor Mark Gordon might want to think twice about this, but I can understand why he might not also. His pockets are being lined by the coal industry. The fossil industries writ large, John, are making a major move to embrace carbon capture and make it their way of being sustainable, right? And we have 60,000 miles of CO2 pipelines planned across the U.S., some of them running to southern Illinois, where they're planning to pump liquid CO2 into the ground and pray to God that it stays in the ground. Sometimes this is legitimate and can work, right? Direct air capture and putting it in the ground where in places where it turns to stone is legitimate. But I'm not a fan of capturing it from a smokestack, even though it is more concentrated in a smokestack, and it is tempting. But Yeah, I think this is just a major initiative on the fossil fuel industry's part to extend the life of fossil fuels. And of course, that's not going to be good for climate chaos.
I
Sounds like there's
Yeah.
a tractor in your backyard.
Yeah, there's construction. Sorry about that. Maybe I'll go on mute.
You're
Right
fine.
outside the window. Yeah. So I'm torn on, on the one hand, the carbon capture stuff I look at as an absolute red herring to let fossils continue their work. They're like, oh yeah, we can fix it. On the other hand, I want them to at least try so that we can maybe potentially advance some technologies, because everybody says we need to extract this CO2 in order for our temperature system to regulate itself better. And if we have to like pull out, and the volume of CO2 is just massive. And so, if these folks are going to test things, that's maybe not bad. It's a real good thing for them to test that and do something, because if it's their money, great. Hopefully, for the best of us, it works out. I don't know. It's rough. It's rough to watch all this happen and watch people get played. Because, I read about the carbon capture facility in Mississippi, and the name is on my tongue, but it was like a $7 billion plant, and the only people that made money were the developers. The citizens of Mississippi definitely did not benefit from that facility. So, oh, look at that. We got a comment. Got a couple comments.
Yeah, I would caution citizens of the world that if you have a CO2 pipeline planned through your community, be aware, because CO2 is heavier than air. When a CO2 pipe bursts, you then have a clear, scentless bubble that will asphyxiate all living things that breathe oxygen, and it's very dangerous. Not to mention the climate aspects of it.
I'd never really thought about that. I mean, that makes obvious sense, but if it blows, you have a nice bubble. Interesting.
Yeah.
So do you know much about? So Robert Latimer made a comment in the room, and he said something about ethanol plants lining up for CCS. Is that just because they're looking to build something new, or what do you think is going to happen with that? Is that a real thing?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this specific project that Robert is referring to. Um, SummitCarbonSolutions.com, but he points out they need to do this to survive. Yeah, the ethanol industry is another example of a fatally flawed industry. We're uh, we're making ethanol from corn, and when you do the math on that, it's pure
Yep.
lunacy. It's way more efficient to just make electricity from that acreage and skip all the chemical inputs that's required to grow corn, and then all of the energy inputs to cook corn into ethanol, right? It's just not good energy economics. And the only reason that ethanol industry exists is because the U.S. government is propping it up, just like it props up corn and beans. Um, so good points, Robert. Thank you for your comments. And yes, CCS is a big industry and about to get a lot bigger. But it is a fight. It is a fight that environmental justice and other activists are tackling here in Illinois and elsewhere. I'm not real close to that, but if you're listening and you are, please reach out to us. We want to bring more relevant news about this, because it's easy, when you're in the clean energy industry, to be in a little bit of a bubble. We live in the future, basically, and there's a very big force, as we pointed out last week, John, when we touched on the size of the incentives that the globe makes to the fossil industry, right? 6% of GDP, I think, was the statistic. And
5.9 trillion.
yes, a lot of dollars. And so, and the way that our democracy functions, money talks, and money is power, and um, there's a lot of money going into CCS. It takes a lot of money to develop 60,000 miles of pipelines. Um, I'd rather see us develop 60,000 miles of hydrogen pipelines than CO2 pipelines, frankly. We do need to suck carbon out of the atmosphere, but we don't need to burn coal and suck carbon out of the stack. We need to just stop burning coal and transition those workers, give them a just transition, provide training, and get them into wind and solar and battery storage, which if you can mine coal and run a coal plant, you can do wind, solar, and battery storage, right? It's not an impossibility. It's not like we're asking these folks to become computer programmers.
I think we should have a massive global effort to figure out how to materialize. I just made up that term. Materialize CO2. And what I mean by that is when you materialize something in my little world, you take it from this gaseous form and turn it into a usable resource. Some people talk about CO2 to fuels because that makes great sense. I also like the concept of taking CO2, breaking it down further, having like oxygen left over, and then making carbon nanotube chains to space elevator, use it for building materials. Like if we can make bricks made out of carbon and then
Right.
just literally bricks, building material or glass or whatever. And if, because then we can turn the CO2 into feedstock. And if we can make the CO2 into feedstock, then the extraction process can be subsidized, at least by the people wanting to buy the product. And then the other half of it, where it makes it less cost competitive, we just say, hey, here's an incentive. If you pull out 1 ton, we'll give you 1 ton free. And there you go, or something. And, it's because right now, from what I've read, it's like $600 a ton for CO2. We probably have to get it down to $50 a ton for it to be cost effective. But maybe if we can use the material, we can do it at $200 a ton because we could sell it for $150. I don't know, but something like that.
I think there are a handful of companies that are working on this, making things like, bricks or blocks that you can then build buildings with, and as long as you power that with wind, solar, and storage, you're good. And we're swimming in at least 5,000 times as much solar as we need. So, just remember that. Do you want to do one more story?
Always want to do one more story. So what's the most exciting one here? All right, so let's do the salt cavern.
Okay, good. I'm good with that. 300 megawatt underground salt caverns being used for compressed air storage.
And I
Another
think
story
China
by
thinks,
Emiliano.
And I think they also think they can expand the cavern into neighboring structures. I'm interested in this. Well, for one, you hear about the CCS, the sequestration portion, sometimes using caverns. But much better with these caverns is that I hear about hydrogen being stored in them. And I think we may have spoken last week, maybe a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I think a couple weeks ago we talked about that project in Utah.
Yep. I've heard about caverns of this nature all across Europe as well. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know much about them, but I remember recently debating whether hydrogen we could do storage efficiently. And somebody said, well, we could use salt caverns. And I'm like, yeah, but where's the geologic structures? You can't just build caverns cost effectively. And they showed me this map of viable caverns. And I was like, oh. And from that moment on, it was no longer a question whether or not we had enough viable salt caverns. Europe has all kinds of tunnels and all kinds of stuff underneath it that can hold whatever the number was. It was like, okay, this fixes the issue. If we learn how to make enough hydrogen cheap enough, the cavern thing fixes the storage issue. And I was like, wow, we just have to have little tiny hydrogen power plants spotted all over the world and plug them into the grid and pump
Yeah.
and empty, pump and empty. And it's like pretty cool. So I think salt caverns, if it keeps developing and we get good with it, works. I thought it was. That's why when I saw this, I was like, cool, nice test. And this is similar-ish to our CO2 dome guys. You know, they're just
Yep.
pumping air, moving air.
Yep. Yeah, I love this concept. It's super clean, very small footprint, and a 60 megawatt facility can store 300 megawatt hours of energy. That seems good. Yeah, I don't know how many of these caverns there are. I don't know anything about that, but I don't doubt that there are many. We have caverns here in central Illinois that are used for natural gas storage, and it's not without its challenges. Sometimes there's one situation in a town nearby where the natural gas is leaking into the water system, and people have
Yeah.
flames shooting out of their kitchen sinks, but
But hey,
air doesn't
what?
air doesn't catch fire though. Air is safe.
Yeah. It's just the stuff that's in the air.
Actually, I don't know if you know this story. When scientists designed the first nuclear bomb
All right.
in World War II, they were afraid that it might ignite the atmosphere, that it might get so
Yes.
hot, and I don't know what that temperature is, but luckily that didn't happen, because if it did, we wouldn't be here.
I remember reading about that. It's like, we got a 5% chance of everybody burning.
I think the site where they were setting those bombs off in New Mexico is called Trinity,
Yeah.
which is a very interesting name. It's a very, it's laden with religious overtones, and the scientists were aware that they were touching God, and we are playing with very dangerous technology there. That when you look at the news, there's credible information that we are very close to a nuclear catastrophe in the world today. We are as close as we've ever been, and either by accident or on purpose, right? And both options exist in parallel, and it's not a happy thought. I don't like thinking about that, but it's pretty scary. Well, thanks for bringing us such great stories, John Weaver. How can our listeners find you, Mr. Commercial Solar Guy?
Main place is commercialsolarguy.com. Send us a contact message. We're also on Twitter. If you just want to have a bunch of cool news, you should really just follow me on Twitter. And then LinkedIn, Solar and Mass, Commercial Solar Guy. We're all over. But Timothy, more importantly, where can everybody find you?
LinkedIn is the best place. Just search for Tim Montague on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter. I'm not as prolific as you are on Twitter, but I'm there. I mostly am putting our content on Twitter. So we are putting out a interview every Tuesday morning, and then these lives on every Thursday midday. So check out all of our content at cleanpower.group/podcast. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. And you can just click on that YouTube icon. That takes you to the subscription page, and subscribe on your favorite audio app, and give us a rating and review, most importantly on Apple and Spotify, because that's how other people will find the content. We're trying to grow the clean energy transition. We're succeeding, John, and the wind is at our back. The future is very bright for humanity. We just have to deploy, and we need you, either existing solar professionals, solar wind and storage professionals, or future solar wind and storage professionals. So if you're not in the clean energy transition, get in. It's a great ride, and it's pure growth for the next 30 years. With that, let's sign off and say, let's grow solar and storage. I'm Tim Montague. Thanks, John. See you next week.
Next week.